You don't own the grass, Logan!
No, but I own the water!
Her Mercedes was already halfway across my lawn when I stepped outside that morning. Dew still glistened on the grass my late wife planted, her last living project, and those heavy tires crushed straight through it like it meant nothing. Behind the tinted glass, Veronica Kemp, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, sat reclined with her sunglasses angled just enough to catch her own reflection. She didn't even flinch when I called her name. "Morning, Mr. Reeves," she said, rolling down her window just 2 inches. "You really should trim this edge. It's encroaching on the community path." That community path was a line of decorative stones my wife laid by hand. I could still picture her kneeling there with the sunlight on her shoulders. And now the board chair had her German tires on it. I took a slow breath. "You're parked on private property, Ms. Kemp." The clipboard queen tilted her head. "Technically, the bylaws classify it as shared frontage. You might want to reread Section 8. That was her favorite phrase, technically. For a moment, I just stared at her reflection in my car window, the way a man might study a chessboard before the first move. Then I said quietly, "You realize I designed half the irrigation system in this neighborhood, right?" That made her finally lower the window another inch. So if you keep parking there, you might get more than grass stains next time." Her smile wavered. It wasn't a threat. It was a prediction. If you've ever felt that pulse of satisfaction when a bully realizes you're not afraid of them, stay right here and hit subscribe right now, because what happened next turned this neighborhood into a masterclass on poetic payback. She dismissed me with a wave of her manicured hand. "You can file a complaint, Logan, but as the officer of rules, I'll probably be the one reviewing it." Then she backed out, leaving ruts deep enough to hold water for days. When she was gone, I knelt and ran my hand over the torn grass. The soil was damp and cold. My wife, Emily, used to say the earth remembers kindness. Right then, I swore it would remember injustice too. People think grief makes you fragile. It doesn't. It makes you precise. Every rule she'd ever thrown at me, every fine she'd tried to issue, I'd memorized them. And one line in those rules was about authorized irrigation systems compliant with city water use codes. That sentence became my blueprint. By noon, I was in my garage sketching designs on a notepad still smudged with motor oil, motion sensors, pressure valves, timed rotation arcs. If the HOA loved regulations so much, I'd give them perfection, and I'd make sure it followed their bylaws to the letter. But the first step wasn't engineering. It was restraint. Revenge only works when it looks like reason. So I played polite. I waved at her during her evening walks, nodded during board meetings, acted like the quiet widower everyone underestimated. The tyrant in heels would glance my way, convinced she'd broken me down to silence. She didn't know silence was a setup. A week later, the neighborhood gossip line buzzed. She'd scheduled another surprise inspection for my yard. I could almost hear her heels clicking up the driveway already. That gave me a deadline, 3 days, to finish installing the system that would make her arrogance visible to every neighbor within shouting distance. While I bolted the first sprinkler head in place, Daniel Morris, the maintenance contractor, stopped by. He looked nervous. "You really going through with this, Logan? She'll lose her mind." "That's the idea," I said, "but legally." He hesitated, then whispered, "Careful. The enforcer in crimson always finds a way to twist the story." "Not this time," I replied, tightening the final valve. "This time, the story writes itself." When the sun set that night, water shimmered across the grass like glass. Each sprinkler head faced the street, precisely calibrated, motion activated, and fully within the HOA's irrigation guidelines. I leaned against my fence, listening to the steady hiss of water pressure, feeling the same quiet anticipation I used to feel before launching a new prototype at work. Because this wasn't about water, it was about boundaries, and the moment someone finally learned to respect them. By sunrise, the gossip had spread like pollen on the wind. Someone had seen me in the yard late at night, tools scattered, wires running beneath the grass. In this neighborhood, that was enough to fuel a full-blown investigation. And sure enough, before I even had my morning coffee, Veronica Kemp was marching down my driveway, heels striking the pavement like a countdown. She didn't bother with greetings. "Mr. Reeves," she announced, clipboard in hand, Unauthorized mechanical installations on HOA property are subject to immediate penalty. The clipboard queen stood there, one manicured finger pointing toward the sprinkler head peeking out from the soil. Her crimson jacket caught the early light, almost glowing, a warning flare in human form. I kept my voice even. Everything here complies with city water use regulations and the HOA's irrigation clause. Section 9, paragraph B. That made her pause. Just a flicker, but I saw it. The moment authority realized it might not have the upper hand. She flipped through her binder, pretending to search. That clause is intended for aesthetic improvements, not for mechanical contraptions designed to water the lawn, I interrupted. That's exactly what these do. They water the lawn. Behind her, two neighbors lingered by the mailbox, pretending to check their mail at 6:45 a.m. Their curiosity was my camouflage. If the officer of rules wanted to make this public, I'd let her. Veronica drew a slow breath, her composure cracking just enough for me to see the irritation underneath. You're testing limits, Mr. Reeves. You might find they snap back. I'm an engineer, I said calmly. Limits are where the fun begins. For a long second, neither of us moved. The air between us felt electric, charged by equal parts defiance and history. This wasn't about sprinklers anymore. It was about control. When she finally turned away, I caught her whisper something under her breath, low enough that only Daniel, who was trimming hedges across the street, might have heard. He glanced at me later, uneasy. You just painted a target on your back, Logan. She started it, I muttered. She always starts it, he replied. But she's also the tyrant in heels who never fights fair. He wasn't wrong. Over the next few days, I noticed her car idling near my property more often. The same silver Mercedes that had scarred the lawn now crawled past like a predator on patrol. Sometimes it stopped long enough for her to take photos. Sometimes she just stared. So, I played along. I watered at precise intervals, kept logs of rainfall, and filed every receipt for my equipment. I wasn't just fighting her, I was documenting her. By the end of the week, she summoned me to an emergency compliance review at the clubhouse. The email was written in legalese so dense it could have doubled as armor. But I showed up, pressed shirt, calm face, quiet confidence. Inside, the board members sat like jurors, pretending impartiality. Veronica stood at the front, a laser pointer in hand, slides behind her showing images of my yard. Mr. Reeves has installed what appears to be a pressure-sensitive irrigation array that activates in response to motion, she began, voice smooth as glass. This could pose a safety risk to pedestrians, pets, and vehicles. I waited until she was done before replying. Actually, those sensors reduce waste and prevent overwatering. They were approved by the city's conservation initiative last quarter. I can provide the documentation. The enforcer in crimson blinked twice. She hadn't expected that. A murmur rippled through the board. One of the younger members asked, "So he's saving water?" "Yes," I said. "And technically protecting HOA property from unauthorized parking." For once, the room tilted my way. Veronica's smile froze, the kind that hides panic behind polish. After the meeting, she followed me outside. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "I think I'm careful," I said. She leaned closer. "Be careful not to confuse clever with untouchable." Her perfume lingered long after she left, sharp, synthetic, and impossible to ignore. That night, I double-checked the sprinkler system and adjusted the angles by 2 degrees, just enough to ensure anyone standing too close to the Mercedes would get caught in the spray pattern. It wasn't revenge yet. It was physics. Waiting. The next morning, the sun had barely crested the rooftops when I spotted Veronica Kemp standing across the street, her phone angled toward my yard like a weapon. She wasn't recording for documentation. She was building her case, one frame at a time. The board chair didn't like losing control, and after the meeting, she was desperate to claw it back. I leaned against my truck, coffee mug in hand, pretending not to notice. It took less than 30 seconds for her to march over, heels clicking in perfect rhythm. "You adjusted the angles," she said coldly, pointing at the sprinklers. "They're well within regulation range," I replied. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Don't play coy, Mr. Reeves. I saw the spray reach the sidewalk this morning. That's technically community space." There it was again. Technically, her favorite shield. I met her gaze evenly. Then maybe you should move your car before it waters itself. The clipboard queen froze, her expression hardening. Behind her, Daniel Morris lingered by the maintenance truck, pretending to load tools but clearly eavesdropping. His body language told the story, his lips wouldn't. Tight shoulders, darting glances, silent regret. She noticed him, too. "You!" she snapped. "Are those systems connected to HOA power lines?" Daniel hesitated. "They're standalone, solar-backed, not on the grid." "Then you're aiding a violation," she said sharply. "You know the consequences for non-compliance, don't you?" Her words hit him like shrapnel. He looked down, murmuring, "Yes, ma'am." Then, with a subtle glance at me, he turned away. The tyrant in heels smirked, satisfied with her display of dominance, and strutted back toward her car. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. She wasn't finished. Later that afternoon, Daniel showed up at my door. He looked uneasy, hat in hand. "Logan, I shouldn't even be here," he said. "She's already told the board you're defying orders, but she's planning something worse. She asked the landscaping crew to test the boundaries around your property tomorrow. That's code for damaging your line." My jaw tightened. "She's trying to trigger a maintenance violation." He nodded. "If the sensors flood the sidewalk, she can fine you for water waste." "Thanks for the warning," I said quietly. "You didn't have to tell me." He shrugged. "I worked under her too long not to recognize a setup. But if she finds out I warned you, I'm finished." I studied his face, honest, tired, and clearly conflicted. "You ever wonder why she targets people like this?" Daniel sighed. "Because she can. She was an insurance auditor before this. Rules are her currency." That night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights reflect off the metal trim of her Mercedes. She'd parked across from my driveway, again like a badge of ownership. My sprinklers waited beneath the soil, silent sentinels under the stars. At 2 a.m., I got up and walked outside. The air was cool, heavy with mist. I adjusted one motion sensor, barely half a degree, and tested the range with a slow wave of my hand. The water arced beautifully, clean and controlled. I smiled. Precision was my language. When dawn broke, the officer of rules appeared exactly as expected. Clipboard ready, sunglasses in place. She gestured toward the sidewalk, where her assistant was setting small orange flags along the property edge. "We're marking the boundary for review," she said. "If any part of your system crosses this line, it'll be removed." I nodded. "Then you'd better mark carefully." Her assistant knelt near the first sprinkler. As soon as he leaned forward, the sensor triggered. An elegant burst of water erupted, soaking his khakis and her clipboard in the same instant. Gasps echoed from the nearby porch crowd. Veronica's shriek cut through the air. She stepped back too late. Another sprinkler activated, catching her square in the chest. The crimson blazer darkened instantly. I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Guess it works." Her face burned redder than her jacket. "You'll regret this, Mr. Reeves," she snapped, stomping toward her Mercedes, dripping and furious. Behind her, Daniel stood frozen, torn between horror and satisfaction. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "That was beautiful." But I saw the fear in his eyes, too. This wasn't the end. It was the spark. The enforcer in crimson would come back with something bigger, and this time, she'd make sure the whole neighborhood watched. And I was ready for that. By the time Friday rolled around, the neighborhood felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every closed curtain carried the same story. Veronica Kemp, soaked and humiliated, had sworn revenge. And when a woman like her makes a promise, she cashes it in publicly. That morning, I found a bright orange violation notice pinned to my mailbox. Improper irrigation alignment. Formal fine pending review. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. The board chair didn't even try to hide her handwriting. I tore the notice down slowly, folded it once, and slipped it into my back pocket. She'd just made her next mistake, documentation that would come back to haunt her. When I looked up, I saw her across the street, phone in hand, pretending to check messages while watching me. That same silver Mercedes sat smugly on her side of the road, water spots still faintly marking the hood like a scar from our last encounter. I crossed over. "Morning, Ms. Kemp," I said evenly. She smiled thinly. Mr. Reeves, I hope you're ready for the board's full review next week. We take environmental violations very seriously. I noticed, I replied, glancing at the notice in my hand. Especially the kind that come with your personal signature. The clipboard queen tilted her head. Transparency builds trust. I don't hide behind paperwork. No, I said quietly. You hide behind bylaws. For a second, her eyes flickered, then hardened. Watch yourself, Logan. You're getting dangerously close to harassment. Harassment? I asked, stepping closer. You've parked on my lawn, fined me for watering, and now you're manufacturing violations. What would you call that? Her jaw tightened. Authority. That word hung between us like a strike of lightning. Daniel walked up from the corner, his toolbox clattering softly. He looked between us, uneasy. Everything all right here? The officer of rules turned to him with that practiced composure. Everything's fine, Daniel. Just another homeowner struggling to understand compliance. Daniel's eyes darted to me, then back to her. He said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. As soon as she walked away, I caught his arm. You're still working the irrigation check tomorrow? He nodded hesitantly. She assigned me personally. Said she wants full photos of your system for evidence. Then bring your phone, I said, and keep it rolling. He frowned. You planning something? I smiled faintly. Just a little clarity. That night, I stayed up fine-tuning the sensors, adjusting timing, calibrating pressure. Every adjustment made the system smarter, more responsive. The sprinklers weren't just protection now. They were precision instruments of poetic justice. Saturday morning came bright and windless. Daniel showed up early, pretending to check equipment while subtly recording on his phone. And right on cue, the enforcer in crimson arrived, red blazer sharp against the pale sky. She didn't look at me, just barked instructions to Daniel. Photograph every head placement, document the angle and range. Yes, ma'am, he said softly. I leaned on the fence, arms crossed. Careful, Daniel, I called. You're in the activation zone. Before she could process what that meant, the nearest motion sensor picked up her movement. A hiss, then whoosh, a crisp jet of water arced perfectly through the air, drenching her once again. The crowd that had quietly gathered burst into stifled laughter. Turn it off, she screamed. I held up the remote. Can't, it's automatic. HOA regulation approved, remember? The tyrant in heels stood there dripping, mascara streaking, her pride evaporating faster than the water on her blazer. She turned to Daniel. You filmed this? He hesitated, then said softly, It's for the report, ma'am. The crowd murmured louder now, phones out, recording, whispering. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker behind her polished expression. She stormed back toward her Mercedes, muttering something about legal action and non-compliance. But the damage was done. The neighborhood had seen her power stripped bare by her own arrogance, and by a perfectly lawful irrigation system. I exhaled slowly, my pulse finally settling. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Because from now on, every time Veronica Kemp walked by my property, the ground itself would remember, and sooner or later, so would she. By Monday morning, the neighborhood was split clean in half, those who thought I'd embarrassed Veronica Kemp, and those who thought I'd exposed her. Either way, everyone was watching. The HOA queen had gone quiet for 2 days, and that silence was more dangerous than her shouting ever was. I knew she wasn't done. The board chair didn't surrender. She plotted. At 8:17 a.m., I got the email. Formal summons for violation review. Attendance mandatory. No signature, no header, just a PDF attachment titled Incident Log Number 94. I opened it. Page 1 was a list of alleged offenses. Water displacement into community walkway, non-compliant equipment, willful obstruction of HOA directives. It was practically poetry written in bureaucratic spite, but the real surprise sat on page 2. Photos, crisp, close-up shots of my sprinklers at night, which meant someone had trespassed. I stared at them for a long time before realizing what she'd done. The officer of rules had crossed a legal line without even noticing. Her obsession had blinded her. That evening I found Daniel waiting near the curb, his phone in hand. He looked nervous. She called an emergency session, said she's presenting evidence from a night inspection. I smirked. She just admitted it on record. He blinked. You're going to use that? I'm an engineer, I said. I don't waste energy. I redirect it. Inside the clubhouse, the atmosphere felt staged. Cool lighting, stacked chairs. Veronica standing near the projector in that same blood-red blazer like she'd dressed for war. "Mr. Reeves," she said as soon as I entered, "please sit. You're the subject of this hearing." "I figured," I replied, taking the lone chair in the center. "You always make sure the spotlight's aimed right where you want it." The clipboard queen smiled. "Transparency, remember?" She tapped her tablet, and the photos appeared on screen, my sprinklers glistening under moonlight. "These were taken during an authorized safety review." "Authorized by whom?" I asked. "The HOA board," she said smoothly. "Which meets only on Thursdays," I countered. "Today's Monday." The room stirred. One of the quieter board members glanced at her nervously. I leaned back. "You entered my property after hours. That's trespassing." She hesitated, just a flicker, but I caught it. "The community has a right to ensure safety," she said. "Safety doesn't come from invading privacy," I shot back. "It comes from respecting boundaries, something you seem to struggle with." For a moment, the tyrant in heels said nothing. Then she turned to the others, her voice silk over steel. "You all saw the footage. This man installed an automated deterrent system that sprays vehicles and pedestrians. He's weaponized his yard." The murmurs grew louder. Someone whispered, "Is that true?" I stood slowly. "It's motion-based irrigation, same tech used in public conservation zones. I even have the municipal permit. Would you like to see it?" I slid a folder across the table. The city seal gleamed under the fluorescent light. Veronica's face paled. She hadn't expected paperwork, she'd expected panic. I added, "And just for context, the system only activates when something unauthorized crosses my lawn. Like, say, a midnight visitor." Gasps fluttered through the room. Her mask cracked. The enforcer in crimson tried to recover, but the damage was irreversible. "This isn't over, Mr. Reeves," she hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "You think you've outsmarted me, but you've only bought time." "I'll take time over tyranny," I said. When the session adjourned, Daniel caught up with me outside. "You just turned her own evidence against her," he whispered. "You know she's furious." "That's the idea." He hesitated, glancing back toward the clubhouse windows where Veronica stood framed by light, talking to two other board members in sharp, tense gestures. "She's going to dig deeper, Logan. I'm counting on it," I said quietly. "Because the deeper she digs, the closer she gets to the hole she's standing in." For the first time, Daniel smiled, a small, nervous smile that hinted at hope. But I knew the war had only shifted to its next phase. The clipboard queen had gone from public embarrassment to private vendetta. And the next time she struck, it wouldn't be with fines or meetings. It would be something colder, smarter, personal. The next few days felt like walking through a storm that hadn't hit yet. Too quiet, too still, too deliberate. I'd embarrassed Veronica Kemp, cornered her with her own arrogance, and made the board question her judgment. But the silence that followed wasn't surrender. It was strategy. She was the kind of woman who weaponized patience. The board chair didn't lash out impulsively. She waited until the stage was set and the lights were all pointed at her. On Wednesday, the first blow came. A city code inspector showed up at my property unannounced. Clipboard in hand, neon vest flashing, he said, "Got a complaint about unpermitted irrigation control." I gave him a long look. "Let me guess, filed by the HOA?" He shrugged awkwardly. "Anonymous submission, but the paperwork's precise. Knew your lot dimensions down to the inch." Of course it was her. The officer of rules knew every blade of grass in this neighborhood. While the inspector checked valves and sensors, a few neighbors drifted over, some curious, some cautious, and one, Mrs. Rowe from 2 doors down, leaned in close and whispered, "She's calling for an emergency re-election. Says you're a liability." "Me?" I asked. "For protecting my own property?" "She's saying you're endangering the HOA's reputation." That word again, reputation. To Veronica, that was sacred. She'd rather scorch earth than lose face. When the inspector left, he shook my hand. "Everything's clean, sir. Looks like she wasted my time." "Get used to it," I said, and watched his truck disappear down the street. By nightfall, my mailbox had another envelope. White, official, heavy with smugness. Inside was a community violation fine, citing disruptive conduct during official meetings and unauthorized recording of board property. Recording? My laugh echoed through the kitchen. She'd twisted Daniel's footage, the same video that had saved me, to claim I had breached policy. The clipboard queen had flipped the narrative. She wasn't attacking me directly now. She was rewriting the record. I called Daniel. His voice trembled. She told the board I leaked confidential material, said you coerced me into filming. Did anyone believe her? Half the room did, he said. But Logan, she's not stopping there. She's threatening to file for a civil restraining order if you continue antagonistic behavior. My chest tightened. Antagonistic behavior? She said you're stalking her online, that you made posts about her. I ran a hand through my hair. I don't even use social media. I know, he whispered, but she created screenshots, fake ones. She's good at this. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then quietly, all right, if she wants to play legal theater, we'll give her an audience. The next day, I went to the city clerk's office. My goal wasn't revenge, it was exposure. I requested public access to HOA filings, meeting logs, and amendment records. It didn't take long before something strange surfaced, a discrepancy in the HOA's incorporation renewal date. The tyrant in heels had missed a filing deadline 6 months ago, which meant, legally speaking, the HOA's enforcement authority had lapsed during that time. Every fine, every ruling, every recorded violation she'd issued since then, potentially void. It was like finding the keystone in her empire of control. That night, I called Daniel again. I need your help, I said. Tomorrow, bring your copy of the minutes from January's renewal meeting, quietly. He hesitated. You're going after her legally, aren't you? Not yet, I said. I'm going to let her walk into her own trap first. The enforcer in crimson was building her narrative of me as an aggressor, but she didn't realize I was already dismantling hers piece by piece. That evening, I sat in my garage drafting an email, not to her, but to the local community affairs journalist who'd once covered HOA corruption in a neighboring district. Subject line, something's wrong with Oak Ridge Estates HOA leadership. As I hit send, thunder rumbled outside, shaking the windows. Fitting, I thought, because the storm she'd been summoning. It was about to change direction, and this time, when it broke, Veronica Kemp would be standing at the center of it. By Thursday morning, the storm I'd felt brewing finally broke, but not the way I expected. A single headline flashed across the local community newsfeed: HOA under scrutiny for lapsed legal status. And beneath it, a photo of Veronica Kemp, her perfect smile, her crimson blazer, her confidence still intact. Though the article's tone made it clear that confidence was cracking. She hadn't even arrived at the HOA office before the neighborhood group chat exploded. Wait, does this mean the HOA's fines don't count? Someone wrote. Can we sue for refunds? The board chair had built her authority on fear. But that morning, fear changed sides. When I stepped outside, Daniel was already waiting by the fence. His expression was torn between relief and panic. She's coming after you, Logan, hard. She called a closed-door meeting tonight. Says she's going to reclaim control. She won't, I said. She's about to learn what transparency actually looks like. He rubbed the back of his neck. There's more. She cornered me this morning, asked if I'd leaked those renewal minutes. I froze. And? I didn't lie, he said. I told her I gave them to you. She said she's handling it internally. Internally, the clipboard queen's favorite word when she planned to destroy someone quietly. Daniel, I said carefully, you've done more than you realize. Those minutes prove she acted without legal authority. But she'll come for you first, make you the scapegoat. His voice dropped. I know. I looked at him, seeing how the weight of it all had hollowed him out. You didn't deserve to be in her crossfire. None of us did. For a moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, you're wrong. I should have spoken up months ago, when she started targeting people for petty violations. I thought staying neutral kept me safe, but silence made me her accomplice. That's when I realized something had shifted. The officer of rules wasn't just losing control of her board, she was losing her witnesses. That evening, the community center's lights burned long past dusk. Through the tinted glass, I could see the red flash of Veronica's blazer as she paced like a general before battle. I entered mid-sentence. And this homeowner, she was saying, has violated. Every clause issued under your expired charter is void, I interrupted, my voice steady but sharp. Her head snapped toward me. The room fell silent. You don't belong here, she hissed. This is a board session. Correction, I said. This is a meeting of concerned residents, and according to state registry, your HOA status hasn't been active since February. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One of the board members flipped through her folder nervously. That's a clerical delay, the enforcer in crimson snapped. We've already refiled. Yesterday, I said, after the article went live. A neighbor, Mrs. Rowe, stood up. Is that true? Veronica's jaw flexed, but she didn't answer. Tell them, I pressed, taking a step forward. Tell them how many fines you issued while your legal authority was dead in the water. She glared at me with such cold intensity it could have frozen air. You think you've won something here? You've made this neighborhood a mockery. You've humiliated the board, and for what? A lawn and a few sprinklers? I smiled slightly. No, for truth, for boundaries, for every homeowner you've bullied behind closed doors. The tyrant in heels slammed her folder shut. You're finished here, Reeves. I'll see you in court. Good, I said calmly, because I've already filed an injunction. On behalf of the residents you find under an inactive HOA, you might want to start printing refunds. Gasps filled the room. Daniel looked down, hiding a faint, trembling smile. Veronica's composure shattered. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I do, I said softly. A woman who built a paper empire and forgot that water ruins ink. The clipboard queen turned on her heel and stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots on tile. As the door shut, the room erupted, some with laughter, some with disbelief. But through the noise, Daniel stepped forward and placed the renewal minutes on the table. For the record, he said, his voice steady, these should have been filed months ago. I was there. She ignored the deadline. The crowd quieted, and for the first time, I saw what real accountability looked like. Neighbors standing up, the fear dissolving from their faces. The board chair had ruled through silence, but silence no longer served her. The river of truth had started to flow, and this time, she wouldn't be able to redirect it. By Friday morning, the illusion of control was gone. The HOA boardroom, once Veronica Kemp's stage, now buzzed with the sound of dissent. Papers shuffled, voices overlapped, and her once loyal allies refused to meet her eyes. But the board chair still walked in like a queen, refusing to see the cracks in her crown. Her crimson blazer blazed brighter than ever, a final attempt to command authority by color alone. She started the meeting with her signature icy tone. Before we continue, I want it known for the record that recent articles and accusations against this board are being handled legally. Defamation will not go unanswered. I leaned forward from the back row. Defamation requires a lie, I said evenly. All I did was tell the truth. Her gaze cut across the room like a blade. You're not a member of this board, Mr. Reeves. You don't get to speak here. Maybe not, I replied, but I'm a resident. And since your HOA status lapsed for 6 months, I have as much right to this room as you do. A murmur rippled through the group, the kind of sound that says people are realizing they've been following the wrong leader. The clipboard queen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You really believe you can dismantle what I built? No, I said. I believe you already did. I'm just holding up the mirror. Her smile faltered for the briefest second, but she quickly regained composure. You're obsessed, she said coldly. You think a few technicalities make you a hero? Not a hero, I said. Just a neighbor who got tired of being threatened by someone who mistook power for purpose. Daniel, sitting 3 chairs away, shifted uncomfortably. His silence had always protected her, but now it only made him complicit. The tyrant in heels turned toward him, eyes narrowing. Daniel, remind the room who authorized last year's maintenance project. His throat tightened. You did, he said softly, without a vote. The color drained from her face. Excuse me? He looked down at his hands. You said we didn't need one because you were acting under emergency authority. That was a drainage repair? That flooded 3 basements, I interrupted, including mine. A heavy silence hung in the air. The same flood that had triggered this entire feud, her negligence disguised as leadership, was back on trial. I leaned forward, my voice low and deliberate. You redirected the runoff system without city approval. I found the plans. The piping was rerouted for cost efficiency, not safety. You didn't ruin my yard by accident, Veronica. You did it to protect your new development project. Gasps cut through the tension like thunder. Her mask cracked. You have no proof. Actually, I said, holding up a flash drive, I do. Daniel sent me the digital minutes of your emergency meeting, the one you deleted. The engineer's report was attached, and it shows that you approved the river redirection to save HOA funds. Daniel flinched, guilt in his eyes. I couldn't keep it hidden anymore, he whispered. For the first time, the officer of rules had no rule to hide behind. Her lips trembled as she searched for words. You're twisting this. I'm reading your own report, I said. The one that proves the flooding wasn't nature. It was negligence. And when I fixed the water line, you find me for it. The room erupted into noise, voices demanding explanations, questions flying like arrows. But through it all, I kept my eyes on her. Her power was slipping. Not because I'd shouted louder, but because I'd made her answer for what she'd buried. The enforcer in crimson stood abruptly, her chair scraping back hard. You think this community will thank you for this chaos? No, I said, but they'll remember it. They'll remember who tried to drown a problem and who brought it to the surface. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, her confidence unraveling thread by thread. As she turned to leave, I said quietly, You redirected the river to ruin me, Veronica. But you forgot. I'm the one who understands how to reverse flow. She paused, the meaning cutting deep, before walking out without a word. Daniel looked at me, pale but resolute. You know she's not done, right? I know, I said, standing, but neither am I. Outside, thunder rolled again, same sound as the storm that had started this war months ago. But this time, it didn't scare me. This time, it sounded like justice closing in. That night, sleep never came. The storm outside echoed the one inside my chest, relentless, deliberate, waiting for a break. By dawn, I knew one thing for sure. Veronica Kemp wouldn't retreat quietly. She was too proud, too calculating. Sure enough, by mid-morning, the board chair struck back. A letter slid under my door. Not handwritten, not emotional, just pure, clinical vengeance. Effective immediately, homeowner Logan Reeves is hereby suspended from all HOA privileges, pending a disciplinary hearing for harassment, interference, and unauthorized dissemination of board materials. Classic Veronica. When the walls start closing in, build new ones. I read it twice, then folded it carefully. It wasn't fear I felt. It was clarity. Every desperate move she made now was proof she was losing control. At 9 a.m., I got a call from Daniel. His voice was trembling again. Logan, she's trying to fire me from the maintenance contract. Said I violated confidentiality. She can't, I said calmly. She doesn't have the legal standing anymore. He hesitated. She doesn't care about legal standing. She just told the board she's filing a private civil suit against you. I almost laughed. For what? Malicious interference, he said. And get this, she wants a restraining order. I stared at the phone. She's escalating to theatrics now. Daniel exhaled shakily. She's unraveling, Logan, but she's dangerous when cornered. I think you should stay low for a few days. No, I said quietly. That's what she's counting on, for me to disappear. Outside, the neighborhood was unusually alive. Residents stood in clusters, whispering, showing phones, shaking heads. Screens glowed with screenshots of HOA emails, meeting leaks, even old photos of the clipboard queen standing smugly beside construction crews near the redirected drainage site. The flood truth had spread, and it was drowning her reputation faster than any lawsuit could. By noon, she was pacing outside her house. I saw her from across the street, the tyrant in heels, her crimson jacket snapping in the wind like a warning flag. She was on her phone, voice sharp and brittle. No, I'm not resigning, she barked. I am the face of this community. They wouldn't exist without structure, without me. I couldn't hear the response on the other end, but the way her expression faltered told me enough. Someone she trusted, another board member, maybe two, had just turned. Her empire was collapsing. Still, I knew this wasn't victory yet. The kind of people like the officer of rules don't accept loss. They rewrite it. That evening, I drove to the city's floodplain office. The same engineer who'd first confirmed my suspicions months ago, Mr. Harris, greeted me with a tired smile. "You were right, Reeves. We found the old plan she altered. The river's redirection was never logged. The pipe reroute cost 3 downstream homes their foundation integrity." "So, what happens now?" "State environmental board's getting involved," he said. "If she authorized it, she's liable, personally." I left with a thick folder of verification documents, the official watermark glinting under the fluorescent lights. This was it, the final piece, not emotion, not revenge, evidence. As I stepped outside, rain started to pour again, sharp, cold, poetic. By the time I reached home, Daniel was waiting on my porch, soaked but smiling. "You did it," he said. "They're done with her. Half the board just voted to suspend Veronica pending investigation." I felt the first deep breath I'd taken in months, but just as quickly, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? Look outside." I froze, then turned slowly toward the street. There she was, the enforcer in crimson, standing under her umbrella, face lit by the headlights of her black Mercedes. Rain streaked down her face, smudging her mascara, but her eyes burned with something darker than rage, obsession. She stepped closer to the curb and shouted through the downpour, her voice cutting like lightning. "You took everything from me, Logan. My position, my reputation. You think this is over?" I didn't move. My voice was calm but sharp. "You did this to yourself, Veronica. The only thing I did was show people what you hid." She laughed bitterly. "I built this community." "And you poisoned it," I said. "Now it's washing you away." Her smile twisted. "You think water will save you? It destroys everything it touches." Then she turned, heels splashing through puddles, and drove off into the storm. For a long time, I stood there in the rain, the weight of it all pressing down. But it wasn't defeat I felt. It was inevitability, because once the flood starts, it never stops halfway, and Veronica Kemp was about to learn that firsthand. By Saturday morning, the neighborhood was no longer afraid of Veronica Kemp. They were curious. The floodplain documents had leaked online overnight. Local bloggers picked it up, and by sunrise, the story headline hit like a thunderclap. HOA under fire after illegal drainage alteration leads to private property damage. The board chair had officially become a scandal. I watched from my porch as residents gathered in small circles, their umbrellas open against the drizzle, phones lit up with images of Veronica's Mercedes splattered with mud from last night's downpour. A few whispered that it looked poetic, the same car that once idled across my lawn, now dirt-streaked and powerless. But I wasn't celebrating, not yet. I knew people like her. They never surrender, they retaliate. Around noon, Daniel showed up again, his expression tense. "She's holding an emergency meeting tonight," he said. "Closed doors, no residents allowed." "Good," I replied. "That's where I want her most, cornered, surrounded, and desperate." He frowned. "You sound like you're planning something." "I am." I lifted the folder from the city office. "We're done talking. It's time for the state to hear what she did." That night, the rain eased, but the tension didn't. I parked down the street near the community center, where the clipboard queen had gathered her dwindling loyalists. Through the fogged windows, I could see her pacing, her crimson jacket still defiant, but the sharp edges of confidence dulled by exhaustion. I texted Daniel, now. He was inside, his conscience finally unchained. 5 minutes later, the side door opened and he slipped me a USB drive. "It's the recording of the whole meeting," he whispered. "You'll want to hear what she's saying." I nodded. "You've done enough, Daniel. Go home before she realizes what you did." He hesitated. "She already knows. And she's not just fighting for her seat now, Logan. She's fighting for revenge." The rain started again as I drove home, windshield wipers slicing through the tension. I plugged in the drive. The audio crackled, then came her voice, cold, controlled, and venomous. "He thinks he's clever. Let him have his 15 minutes. Once my attorney files the injunction, I'll bury him in fees until he breaks." There was a pause, then another voice, one of the board members, hesitant. "But what about the flood report? If that gets verified?" Her response was pure ice. "It won't. By the time they verify anything, I'll have redirected the narrative. Again. That word, redirected, hit me like a jolt. The same arrogance that started this war, the same blind belief that no force, not law, not nature, could push back against her will. The tyrant in heels had learned nothing. So I made my next move. I compiled every piece of evidence, the altered blueprints, the meeting minutes, the engineer's certification, and now her own recording, into one file. Then I sent it to the local environmental bureau's anonymous tip line. Within hours, I got a confirmation, received and under urgent review. By morning, the consequences would be irreversible, but fate has a sense of drama. At 2 a.m., pounding on my door jolted me awake. I opened it to flashing blue lights. Police cars lined across the street. 2 officers stood on my porch. "Mr. Reeves?" one asked. "We received a vandalism report filed by the HOA president. She claims you damaged her property." I almost laughed. "Let me guess. The sprinkler system?" The officer blinked. "You're aware of the incident?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Because it's motion activated. It only sprays when someone steps on my lawn, including the officer of rules herself." The other officer checked his notes, visibly suppressing a smirk. "Well, seems like a civil matter. We'll file the report and be on our way." From across the street, Veronica stood under her umbrella again, her face half lit by a streetlight, her mascara streaked, her jaw clenched. She looked less like authority now, more like a storm unraveling. "You won't win," she shouted. "You never belonged here." I met her glare with quiet conviction. "No, Veronica. I just never bowed." Her lips parted as if to reply, but the words never came. The officers guided her back across the street. When they left, I stood alone, the sprinklers glistening in the light. The very traps she'd mocked now turned into symbols of her defeat. Tomorrow, the investigation would go public. Tomorrow, the world would see what power looks like when truth finally floods through the cracks. The rain began again, soft and steady. Not a threat this time, but a cleansing. The community hall smelled of coffee and tension. Folding chairs creaked like old bones as the room filled. Cameras arranged like vultures on the front row. I felt every eye settle on me the moment I stepped to the microphone. Veronica Kemp stood at the head table, posture immaculate, her smile ready-made. The board chair, the enforcer in crimson, the clipboard queen all folded into one impossible composure. She'd expected a scolding, a neighborly complaint. She hadn't expected a crowd that wanted answers. I opened with the question that had become our quiet ritual. "Where are you watching from?" And it landed softer and heavier than I'd planned. It wasn't a performative line. It was an invitation. People answered with breath, with murmurs. I could see smartphones light up like a second ceiling. This was no longer my private fight. It was theirs. Veronica began with the rehearsed script. Procedure, policy, veiled concern for community standards. Her words slid over the room and stuck to no one. The tyrant in heels attempted a pivot toward decorum, but a woman in the third row raised her hand and spoke about her basement, the one that flooded after the culverts were blocked. A man beside her said his garden had vanished beneath mud just last month. Stories came like small, sharp stones. I let them speak. I played the clip Daniel had slipped me, his voice low and trembling, admitting he'd assisted with redirecting drainage plans under pressure. The audio echoed, and the enforcer in crimson's scripted cadence unraveled when she heard herself. You could see the color drain from her face the way a weathered flag fades in sun. Then the conflicted witness stood. He'd been the quiet one on the board, polite at meetings, quick with concessions. He cleared his throat, hands shaking, and confessed more than we'd hoped. Unauthorized orders, late-night site changes, verbal threats to contractors who balked. The room went still, the kind of still that tilts the axis of small towns. When he finished, he'd not only changed his story, he'd changed the trajectory of the entire hearing. Veronica tried the old tricks. She called the evidence anecdotal. She called the witnesses mistaken. The clipboard queen invoked bylaws like incantations. The officer of rules barked about liability and legal exposure. But the engineer we'd brought forward, a neutral, credentialed city inspector, walked everyone through what proper flood controls looked like, and then pointed in plain terms at what they'd done wrong. He used maps and permit numbers and code language, but his conclusion was as simple as a dropped stone. They'd altered flows illegally. Neighbors exchanged glances, and murmurs turned to angry, precise questions. The man who'd watched his prized azaleas shoveled his hand through his hair and demanded restitution. A mother held up a photo of her driveway full of debris after last season's rerouting. Reporters scribbled. A local anchor muttered into a recorder. The live stream in the back amplified everything into the morning feed. Veronica's facade cracked in small, precise places. The petty slights she'd used as armor, a clipped smile, a curt dismissal, now felt like brittle veneers. The enforcer in crimson snapped at a board ally. The tongue sharpened, then faltered. The tyrant in heels issued a thin threat about litigation, but threats need teeth, and everyone could see she'd bitten her lip. When the moderator called for a recess so the environmental agency could send an inspector, the room exhaled all at once. Outside the hall, conversations had already started changing. Neighbors who'd been passive stood together and planned a petition. The old man who'd never signed a form offered his truck as a convoy to transport damaged property. Community organizing had begun quietly, in the spaces between anger and action. As the crowd filtered out, a woman lingered to hug my shoulder, whispering, "We heard you." A teenager pointed her phone at me and asked for an interview. Veronica left through a side door with a small cluster of loyalists trailing. The board chair's head held high, but shoulders narrower than before. Her strategies had been exposed in public light. Secrecy had dissolved. I walked out into the late sun with a strange calm. The public confrontation hadn't settled everything. I knew the legal fights would grind on, that countersuits and threats would come. But something fundamental had shifted. The balance of power had tilted away from the clipboard queen and toward a neighborhood that now felt like a living, breathing jury. Tonight the story had left private rooms and moved into the open. That made the next steps possible. Inspectors would measure, reporters would follow, and a vote, democratic, messy, irrevocable, might yet remove the board that put property above people. The hall had decided to listen. That choice would echo in ways Veronica Kemp couldn't control. I watched the neighborhood wake up like a lake opening after winter. First ripples, then a swell. The clubhouse smelled of coffee and paper. Its windows were taped. Veronica Kemp's name still hung on the marquee, but the marquee felt like a caption on a closed chapter. We'd forced light into places it hadn't been before. That mattered. After the hearing, the inspectors measured grades, traced culverts, and photographed decisions laid bare. Contractors who'd been threatened gave sworn statements. Neighbors who'd been quiet now had signatures and voices. Democracy is messy and loud, but it works if people do the small, boring things. Sign a form, turn out at a meeting. Veronica tried to reframe, sending glossy letters about procedural oversights and unintended consequences. She arranged private meetings, smiling as though tone could undo images of flooded basements and ruined gardens. The enforcer in crimson had lost her armor. Surprise. The board called for an emergency vote. We organized block by block, sat at kitchen tables, and explained what was at stake. The clipboard queen's allies dwindled when the insurance estimate was read aloud. The number on paper was a quiet roar. The officer of rules sent legal threats. Our neighbor lawyer had answers for every bluff. We didn't need to be louder. We needed to be steadier. On vote day turnout was the story. People who'd never attended filled the community room, and the count shifted like a tide. Veronica took the podium with practiced calm, then watched ballots tell a different story. The microphone carried the final tally. The board was recalled. The tyrant in heels left with a small box and a posture that tried for dignity but couldn't quite carry it. Restitution moved along slow, bureaucratic paths. Insurance claims, contractor liens, municipal fines. But they moved. The most important thing was simpler. Neighbors repaired what was broken. The kid who'd been keeping his bike in a neighbor's garage went home with it. The elderly woman with the ruined flower bed planted new bulbs with her granddaughter. My motion sprinkler gambit, the small, private justice, became a lesson, not an end. I dismantled the barriers when it had done its work. Veronica resurfaced occasionally in local headlines, a portrait of defiance that read differently now. She tried to start a petition to return to the board, but petitions are paper, and people remember. Power shifts when people refuse to normalize harm. The community chose stewardship over spectacle. I learned that victory rarely looks like a single dramatic blow. It's a series of precise, sometimes tedious moves that add up. It's neighbors bringing chairs to a petition table at dawn. It's an engineer explaining drainage to a room that had been told rules were sacred. It's leaders finally answering for choices they made. When I walk past the vacant lot where Veronica once staged standoffs, I notice a new sapling at the corner, thin and staked with a ribbon. It was planted by people who wanted growth, not resentment. That ribbon felt like a small promise. I felt hollow and relieved in equal measure, a weird balance of loss and strange pride. The motion sprinklers had been a small, private answer to a persistent humiliation. They'd soaked a luxury car, but they'd also soaked arrogance. Standing there, watching neighbors talk and tools clatter, I understood vengeance wasn't the point. Restoration was. I thought of my kids, of why I started this. I slept deeply that night. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. I didn't end this to be loud. I ended it to be useful. The neighborhood is calmer, not perfect. People visit, talk, and fix things. They learn to call an inspector, read a map, and sign a form. They'd found that agency isn't flashy, it's available. That's the part that will last.